tonight for Mindful Insights, the current state of psychedelics in mental health. And I have Bev's biography here. It sounds like a lot of you already know her, but I will share. Bev is a current master's student at the University of Wisconsin School of Pharmacy and Psychoactive Pharmaceuticals, advocate and speaker on psychoactive-assisted therapies for PTSD and depression, experienced wellness instructor with a background in biochemistry, holistic nutrition, and mental health care access. All right, with that, Bev, I'm going to let you take it over.
Thank you guys so much. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming so, as long as you can, Kelly.
Yep.
Thank you guys for being here. I know so many of you have taken time away from your very, very busy lives. So tonight I'm going to be talking about psychedelics, and I decided that I'm going to define those because a lot of people have confusion about what that is. And these include psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, MDMA, which is also referred to as Molly and ecstasy, but also ayahuasca, 5-MeO-DMT, LSD, ibogaine, and even cannabis and ketamine are considered psychedelics. So, and that's not the exhaustive list, but all of them are really different compounds. Some are natural plant materials. Some come from animals, like DMT comes from toads. And I can't imagine how anybody would have found out that you could lick a toad and something would happen. And there's also some that are chemically synthesized in labs, and they all alter states of consciousness by working on different parts of your brain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychoactive history as well as the current state of the US as it grapples with medicalization and legalization. I'm looking out on this group, and as you know, I know some of you, and I kind of feel like I should have made this into a drinking game so that you guys would have all stayed engaged. So bear with me. A little bit about myself. I've been a Stoughton resident for more than 30 years, raised my kids here, and like Kelly said, I've worked in wellness, fitness, and holistic nutrition within the community and the Stoughton area school district, giving classes on wellness and providing core conditioning and training for sports teams. I'm currently getting that master's degree from the School of Pharmacy and Psychoactive Pharmaceuticals. This is the first graduate program of its kind in the country. And it's really interesting because Wisconsin, specifically the UW, and USONA, a company in Fitchburg, are really leading the way in this research and in these clinical trials to try to get some of these medicines approved. I believe really my professors and my peers are the ones that are going to shape this industry as we go forward. So I've been asked why I got interested in the subject, and I talk about my nephews who were both Marines. And one of them came home from Afghanistan and let me know that he lost 2 of his colleagues in military operations. But since he had been home, he has lost more than 30 of his colleagues to suicide. So I did some more research, and according to the Department of Veterans Affairs, since 9/11, 7,000 military have lost their lives in military operations. But in that same amount of time, more than 32,000 have lost their lives to suicide. Now, I was at a talk last week, and a professor said that that number is so low and that they're thinking that the number of suicides by military personnel is more like 150,000 in the last 20 years. So it's devastating. During the pandemic, about 44 military vets and active military personnel committed suicide every day. And now that's evened out to about 22 per day. You know, I honestly can't understand why that isn't plastered across news media and that we're not doing more to provide help for these vets. And so that's one of the reasons I became interested in this subject. And the more I learn, the more passionate I become, because I think that these medicines can give us answers for people who really need help with different conditions. It's important for my generation, which a few of you are from, because we've all been immersed in the war on drugs, and we're super skeptical of this kind of medication. I have a friend who was like, oh my God, Bev, you do not need to be studying this. We do not need more drugs. And all I could say to her was, you are so lucky that you don't have a loved one that is desperately seeking help with a mental health condition. So I'm anxious to talk to you about this, and we'll go through and tell you what's been happening. I'll stop after a couple slides and ask if anybody has any questions. So put them down in the chat, and then Kelly will ask them because I can't see the chat. And I also apologize that I'm going to have to follow along with notes because usually I talk off the top of my head, but then you guys might be sitting here for like 7 hours because there's so much to say. So I know nobody wants to hear me for that long. So I'll give you a brief history of the psychedelic roller coaster that we've been on. It started in the 60s and which was a really interesting time. Most people have an idea that it was completely wild, free love, hippie movement. I feel like I should have been a teenager then. And there were a lot of amazing things that were going on in the world of psychedelic research. Psilocybin mushrooms didn't come to the United States until 1957, when a banker and his wife traveled to Mexico and participated in a mushroom ceremony. They brought back this amazing experience and wrote about it in an article in Life magazine in 1957, detailing their experience. That article was pivotal in introducing the rest of the world to magic mushrooms and other psychedelics. So he brought back samples to a Swiss chemist, Albert Hofmann, who isolated psilocybin and began producing pills for the next 15 years for research, and produced thousands of doses of psilocybin that were administered in clinical experiments. Psychiatrists, doctors, and mental health professionals considered psychedelics to be promising treatments as an aid to a broad range of psychiatric diagnoses, including alcoholism, schizophrenia, autism, depression, anxiety, and other things. So even back then, there was great research going on. And at the same time, Timothy Leary and Richard Albert were both psychology professors at Harvard and became interested in the experiences that they read about in life. And so they went to Mexico and became intrigued by the revolutionary potential that these mushrooms had for psychotherapy. Leary was quoted as saying that during his experience, he learned more during the 6 or 7 hours after he ate psilocybin mushrooms than he learned in all of his years as a psychologist. So the psychologist proceeded to come back from Mexico and start the Harvard Psilocybin Project. They not only experimented with graduate students and undergraduate students, but they also experimented with themselves at the same time and found a lot of promising psychological benefits. So in the 60s, psilocybin and other psychedelics were considered wonder drugs that could cure everything from addiction to anxiety. Leary's project
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I think that's Judy. Anyway, Leary's project faced controversy due to concerns about the legitimacy, safety, and ethical implications of the research methods. And ultimately, the project came to an end following criticism and leading to his dismissal. In the meantime, people were flocking to Mexico to get a chance to experience those mushrooms. And I could spend an hour talking about the disaster that happened among the indigenous community that Wasan, that Baker wrote about. But anyway, the burgeoning hippie movement had begun to embrace the power of magic mushrooms and other psychedelics and expanded them further into pop culture, literature, film, and especially music. The hippie movement was considered a threat to the establishment, and by 1968, the establishment had enough of the hippies. So before I go on, does anybody have a question? Anything? Okay, perfect. So everybody might remember that in 1968, Richard Nixon was elected president and promised to bring back law and order against the young people who had rejected classic American morals. The establishment was sick of the hippies and the war on drugs began. Nixon called Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America. And honestly, people my age, you remember that war on drugs. We thought drug addicts were hiding around every corner waiting to, feed us drugs. In June of 1971, Nixon officially declared this war, stating that drug abuse was public enemy number one. And by the early 70s, psychological and psychotherapy research using psychedelics had completely stalled. It was increasingly difficult to obtain drugs needed to conduct proper academic studies. But this is also a sign of, it was also just another sign about the drug medicine divide highlighted in the segregation between white wealthy people and people of color. The difference between well-to-do white drug users over decades and often junkie users was the difference between calling one group patients who had an addiction and got help in a hospital and another group criminals who went to prison for the same affliction. So for a century, we've promoted certain legal drugs for the wealthy white while waging war on close chemical analogs for certain minorities. And it's pretty much a known fact that the war on drugs really just accomplished putting hundreds of thousands of men of color in jail and was considered a failure. In 2017, we had more overdose deaths than in the whole Vietnam War put together. So the drug war was highly criticized for disproportionately targeting communities of color. It has been criticized for its focus on punishment rather than on treatment and rehabilitation, and its negative impact on communities, particularly low-income and minority communities. The war on drugs has been criticized for wasting resources and rather than investing in prevention, treatment, and harm reduction. So these policies and practices have been exacerbated in community systems and keep showing up in employment, education, housing, public benefits, and healthcare. More than 1.5 drug arrests are still made per year. About 550,000 of those are for cannabis-related offenses alone. The drug war cost the US over $1 trillion since 1971, which averages out to $9.2 million daily up through today. So years later, John Ehrlichman, who was a top advisor to Nixon, was quoted as saying in a major publication, "You know what this war was really about. The Nixon White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the hippies or Blacks, but by getting the public to associate hippies and Blacks with drugs and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them on the nightly news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." So that's crazy to me because I remember living through all that. But as a result of that war on drugs that Nixon started, the Controlled Substances Act was enacted. And this put all drugs into 5 schedules. Congress enacted this Controlled Substances Act. So Schedule 1 was the most dangerous drugs, and Schedule 5 being the least dangerous, like aspirin. All psychedelics were designated Schedule 1 drugs, which means they had absolutely no medical value. They were highly toxic and they had high abuse potential. The fact is that psilocybin mushrooms, for example, don't fit a single one of those criteria. And now Congress is currently, they have a push to do some rescheduling of these drugs because fentanyl is a Schedule 2 drug, while marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug. So in other words, Schedule 2 fentanyl is considered less dangerous than marijuana because there are current medical uses for fentanyl. The fact that was that psychoactive drugs were completely written out of academia and deemed a joke by the scientific community. Psychedelic potential had been discredited, and research from those drugs went from being promising new medical treatments for many health issues to being labeled poisons. And for 50 years, there was basically no research. Think about all the medical breakthroughs that we have seen in the last 50 years or since 1970 in all other medical areas. And so now we skip ahead to about 2018, and it had been obvious that psychotherapy and SSRIs had been underwhelming in their performance. Last week, a doctor was talking in a conference, and he said about 20% of people benefit from SSRIs, specifically against treatment-resistant depression. And so, recently we all kind of have seen that psychedelics have come back into the forefront of research. And that is because Congress has designated MDMA and psilocybin as breakthrough therapies. And this means that it's easier now for them to be obtained for research, and they have more. And one of the designations is that they have to have more potential than what is currently being used. So this designation expedites the development and review process of psychedelic-based therapies, fostering increased research and clinical trials. There are currently about 400 clinical research trials being conducted right now on psychedelics in the US, from everything from addiction, depression, PTSD, and some of the original end-of-life cancer help. It's interesting, since I've been giving these talks for the last 2 years, how much has really changed in that short of a time, both good and bad. And even people who were giving this talk last week said just since they were making up their slides on Monday, and by Thursday, after the election, they were like, we don't even really know what's going to happen just in the last week. But psychedelics are believed to work on modulating neural circuits and promoting neuroplasticity. This potentially leads to lasting changes in brain behavior function, and behavior studies have shown alterations in brain connectivity patterns, increased communication between brain regions, which may underlie its therapeutic effects. The inclusion of these psychedelics in therapies challenges traditional approaches to mental health because we're not relying solely on symptom management. Psychedelic-assisted therapies can focus on facilitating transformative experiences, promoting self-reflection, and ultimately addressing the underlying cause of the disease. So this shift has the potential to revolutionize mental health care by offering new pathways to healing. Does anybody have any questions yet?
Less about bad days and enjoy.
Yes, there is a question.
Okay.
Hi, Bev. Awesome information. Juan and Lisa here. How do you see shrooms, quote unquote, being regulated as we get ready for 2025 moving forward? Are there any states that have shrooms legalized or doctors able to prescribe? Shrooms have never been a shameful drug, in my opinion, but because they're not readily available.
Such great questions. Mushrooms, psilocybin is the least toxic drug that's really known. And so it is very, very safe. I'm going to talk about Oregon, who has decriminalized psilocybin. And now there are service centers available that you can have psilocybin treatments that are non-medical. And so I will talk about that because, the government just can't get out of its own way. So we thought when MDMA was going to be approved this last fall, that psilocybin would be approved by next year in 2025. I'll tell you more about it, but there's probably been a little bit of a pause in that, but it is going to get approved, and it is going to be real potential for people. So in fact, that was a good segue because psilocybin has been decriminalized in Oregon and in Colorado. But I'll just first say that, there's a lot of companies, because there are breakthrough therapies, and there's about 400 studies going on right now, that there's a lot of companies jumping on this bandwagon. Hundreds of companies and universities doing psychedelic research. And finally, the military has joined in and has 5 research studies going on now at the VA with psilocybin. Some states are going forward and decriminalizing. So this is what I was just mentioning. I'm going to talk a little bit about Oregon because they were so progressive, and their intention was to start service centers that were not medically backed, that did not require insurance, and that didn't require healthcare professionals to run them. They were going to help people could go to these service centers for any kind of treatment that they needed if they were willing to come and pay. The original taxpayer approval of Measure 109 happened in November of 2020, and it paved the way for development of regulated psilocybin mushroom therapy programs. It was a groundbreaking initiative that was supposed to establish a framework for the use of psilocybin-assisted therapies in a supervised clinical setting, again, but non-medical. Healthcare providers did not have to be there. The program dictates that you can only take mushrooms in a treatment center in the presence of a trained facilitator.
In his case, Down syndrome. As a child, doctors thought he would never walk.
Is that
or talk.
somebody's speaker is on?
Somebody you're not muted.
According to a
Somebody's
survey,
not
about
muted.
15% of
It's
people
Betty.
who
Betty
have
Elster
Betty?
needs to mute it.
employed,
Betty.
but fear
Betty?
separate hotel around
How do I
If
do
you can
that?
hit the mic button on top.
Mic button on top.
Yep. Do you see it on the top
There you
right by the
go.
leave? Thank
There
you.
you go. That's okay. But anyway, so this program was amazing, and it dictated that users could only take a treatment in the presence of a trained facilitator in a service center that was approved by the Oregon Health Authority, using psilocybin grown in a state-approved manufacturing lab and tested only by state licensed labs. Again, being different than a medical facility, a medical facility needs FDA approval first. The psilocybin program in Oregon was designed to be funded by fees and not by taxpayers. In fact, the backers of Measure 109 took great pains to try and make psilocybin available to the masses. After the initiative passed in November 2020, Kate Brown, who was the governor then, instructed the new psilocybin advisory board called the Oregon Health Authority to ensure equitable access to this therapy for everyone who might benefit from treatment, including indigenous tribal communities and communities of color and underserved communities. But as of July 2023, almost 3 years later, there was not a service center up and running yet. The OHA had requested $6.6 million from taxpayers to keep the program going for another year, even though there was nothing to show for it. And because of the extreme expenses and fees associated with the starting of these service centers, organizers at one of them said that they would have to charge up to $15,000 per treatment just to keep the center afloat. I heard last week at a conference that there was a 5-day treatment offered in Oregon for $200,000. So these taxpayers were galled, thinking that there was nothing to show for this program, and they were still asking for funding. And this was supposed to be a model for psychedelics throughout the country. Yet it still costs $10,000 every year for a service center fee, $2,000 a year for the facilitators, $10,000 for the facilitators to be credentialed, and extraordinary and exorbitant fees for insurance, security systems, liability insurance. And right now, every service center is still having to charge at least $3,500 a session to just break even. So this is the problem. The Oregon Health Authority can't even get out of its own way. And since July 2023, there are now 6 service centers in place in Oregon with a 3,000 person waiting list. And the cost of each treatment is still between $3,000 and $5,000. So it is inaccessible to any underserved populations. And that's one of my huge concerns, even after the FDA approves it. Even if the FDA approves these drugs, if you don't have insurance, and even if you do have insurance, I think it's going to be price prohibitive unless we can make some changes. I was at a conference last week, and one of the representatives from Oregon was talking about how exciting all the data was on depression and treatment-resistant depression, but failed to mention how much these treatments have been costing everybody, and that they need to work on providing more services. But right now, this is a rich person's wellness retreat, and they're really struggling to figure out a way to change that. Colorado decriminalized psilocybin and also other drugs. They're thinking of opening up service centers for ayahuasca and DMT too, also, but currently are feeling like they have to charge between $3,500 and $5,000 for a treatment. So the potential for unique mental health experiences is going to keep increasing. As of 2 years ago, there was incredible hope for the use of psychedelics for all these health conditions. And the psychedelic industry is poised to be worth $7 billion by 2027. I think there are between 40 and 50 companies now that are actively involved in just magic mushrooms and just psilocybin alone. And if you would have talked to me 1 year ago, everybody believed that MDMA was going to be approved for PTSD by this past fall of 2024, and then psilocybin was going to be approved next year. But that's not exactly how it has happened. So, you know, as I said, there's been incredible hope for the use of psychedelics in many health conditions. And there's a lot of companies jumping on the bandwagon. And I could give probably another 1 hour talk on just the ethics involved in these biotech companies as they're trying to develop psychedelics. And there's a lot of struggles and a lot of competition and a lot of concerns going forward with this industry that's a little unique to this industry itself. Right now, there are struggles with working with indigenous communities that have been working with these plant medicines for thousands of years, taking their wisdom and traditions and not contributing back to their communities. There are patenting issues because these indigenous communities that know how to use these plant medicines had their knowledge spread verbally instead of having it written down. So there's no IP protection. And pharmaceutical industries are pursuing innovation through intellectual property rights with no plans for reciprocity or compensation for these indigenous communities who have protected those traditions for thousands of years. You know, I think it's critical to reconsider this approach. There's at least 24 registered patent processes for psilocybin, with no pharmaceutical developers having reached any reciprocal agreements with any indigenous communities. Again, one of those problems is that they haven't patented anything, and so pharmaceutical companies don't feel any obligation to reach back out. There are exceptions because there are some companies that are putting indigenous representatives on their boards, giving part of their profits back to communities for education and conservation. And there are also companies that are willing to do this research and development without applying for patents because they want it available for all humanity. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but typically when indigenous voices have been engaged, a lot of times their presence has been symbolic with little distributed benefit going back to them. Another problem is patenting issues. One company, Compass Pathways, which is heavily involved in clinical trials with psilocybin, has made a synthetic psilocybin and has tried to patent it for about 90 different conditions, from PTSD to every different kind of depression, to alcohol, substance use disorder, but even down to hearing loss, skin picking, different rashes, almost anything that you could imagine, they're trying to patent. And not only that, they were trying to patent the very room that the therapy was going to take place in. They were trying to patent the soft furniture, the music that was playing, the color of the paint on the walls, and even the artwork. So it's really gotten out of control. And luckily, those patents did not go through, or at least not all of them. But, you know, patents like that are going to keep a lot of innovators from even getting involved in psychedelics because they're not going to want to be in these patent fights. And so another concern that we're having is that the industry is also going to have to deal with the need for additional mental health professionals. Right now, the FDA wants to require 2 facilitators to be in every treatment. And so each treatment is going to take between 6 and 8 hours. So that's super staff intensive, but also super expensive to think that you're going to have 2 mental health professionals for a whole day treating one person. It's estimated that there will be a need for 100,000 new mental health professionals if the FDA doesn't find a way to change their minds about this. And we have talked about a lot of different options that might be available. So as late as March, the whole psychedelic industry was gearing up for the FDA to approve MDMA for PTSD. Lykos Technologies, which is a subsidiary of MAPS, submitted 2 phase 3 trials that were extremely successful in their results. 71% and 64% of the participants after 1 or 2 treatments did not have any acknowledgeable symptoms of PTSD. The companies were gearing up for manufacturing and commercialization and adding to their staff. The company was working with the FDA closely to make sure that they had everything they needed. There's a lot of complicated reasons that they didn't pass, but in August, the FDA denied approval for MDMA, and it was a blow to everyone. As I sit and listen to my professors, though, who work at the FDA, there were a lot of things that weren't surprising. But this denial was really an example of how the U.S. is struggling to get its attempts to get psychoactive market going. The application for the new drug was denied by the FDA because they believed there were limitations that prevented them from concluding that the drug is safe and effective for the proposed indication of PTSD, which, I mean, I don't think there was any doubt that it was successful. The results were successful. But they have now asked Lykos to do another phase 3 trial. And their last phase 2 and phase 3 trial to get this initial FDA submission took 17 years and tens of millions of dollars. So it has been a devastating blow for a lot of people counting on the future of this medication. Republican Representative Jack Bergman, a former Marine Corps general, noted, "We have a mental health crisis and a suicide epidemic with thousands of military vets taking their own lives every year. I would ask the FDA to consider the negative ramifications of them not taking action, which means more vets die needlessly every day. It's unacceptable. The potential of MDMA-assisted therapy to help our warriors heal from the inevitable wounds of war remains paramount." So there are several reasons that the denial, again, was not because the trials weren't successful, but they raised major issues of functional unblinding during the studies and therapy problems. So functional unblinding, I can explain that where every research trial needs to be double-blind placebo studied, which means half of the participants are going to get the drug, MDMA, and half the participants are going to get a placebo, which is just a sugar pill. The participants aren't supposed to know what they're getting. The researchers aren't supposed to know what they're getting, and the therapist. There was therapy associated with this trial, and the therapists weren't supposed to know what they were getting. And so nobody was supposed to know. But the sad thing is that obviously there was no way that you could make a placebo that would mimic MDMA. And so once people took their medications, it was pretty immediately obvious who was taking the MDMA and who had the placebo. The participants knew it, the therapists knew it, and the researchers knew it. So the FDA called it a biased study. They also said that the therapist doing the therapy could have even been more biased by doing therapy that they might have been trying harder for the people that were taking the drug because everybody wanted this to be a successful trial so badly. So, there's also a lack of understanding of the role of therapy in conjunction with MDMA. And the FDA doesn't have an experience approving therapies. There's a lot of social taboos and prejudices around the psychedelics, grounded in years of moral and cultural dogma. And it's going to be a complex political scenario to navigate, especially now when we don't know what the next president and government is going to feel about this. So it'll be really interesting. While this decision is going to set the integration of psychedelics into the mainstream back by years, the science and research that has been done so far is going to continue to influence the world. And there will be so much more research coming our way. The truth is that we're already in this new world of psychedelics, and there's really no going back. There's a long trajectory of historical setbacks. But within a week of the FDA denial, Lykos, a subsidiary of MAPS, decreased their staff by 30%. They removed the founder of MAPS from their board. And now Compass Pathways has also let go 30% of their employees. So there's definitely going to be a pause in the industry to reassess what is going to happen next. But I don't think it's going to change the trajectory of this work. Does anybody have any questions so far?
There is. Lisa's back. Are there applications beyond psilocybin that can help to make shrooms open to other markets beyond medical? Thinking move the needle in a few vertical areas to grow the market.
We're working on these community-based programs, such as those service centers. Wisconsin is a little behind. We're not doing anything here specifically, but because the UW and USONA is so heavily involved in these trials, we are working to make them more available, but again, until they're rescheduled outside of Schedule 1, they are illegal. And so until we decriminalize psilocybin, officially they can't be made available for people unless you're in a research trial. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the research trials in a minute. But we just have to, I think that there was a big discussion. I don't know if more states will start decriminalizing, or if because of the FDA denial of MDMA, there's going to be a real pause and we're going to have to reassess and try to figure out what's going on. Yeah. Research Lovitz, Juan wants to be a guinea pig. I'm going to tell you about some I'll tell you about some research trials that are going on at the UW that are actually actively looking for participants.
There's someone that has their hand raised. We'll let that
Yeah.
person
Who's
go.
that? Is that Judy Harding?
Well, it's Alexis, but close.
Oh.
Please don't use my last name, just in case. Quick question. So you mentioned 2 times can be 60 to 70% effective. I guess the question is, you said with therapy, so are the 2, as compared to me just obviously doing it on the street, right? If I have PTSD, are the 2 people in the room with me just keeping me safe, or are they literally walking me through like a talk therapy type thing?
No, that's the interesting thing. I think the therapy that was associated with MDMA was more the integration afterwards, but not that much integration afterwards. And the 2 therapists that are in the room, which aren't supposed to be doing anything other than keeping you safe, maybe guiding you if you are going down a rabbit hole and need to be redirected. But that's the whole point, is all of these therapies, you're supposed to be going inward and doing your own work. And so one of the things we talked about, and even one of my professors suggested to the FDA, is that one of the people in the room could potentially be a family member, a loved one that's trained for a couple hours. Because if it is just a situation of keeping you safe and making you feel comfortable and, helping you to the bathroom if you need to go, we don't need two doctors in the room. And one of the researchers last week also suggested that maybe nurses could be the ones that were actually sitting with the treatment, and that the doctors and the psychiatrists and the mental health professionals would be doing the preparation and the integration afterwards. And so there's other ways that they can do it, and we just have to make sure that there's, that the FDA will agree to that. And so, there's a lot of alternatives. And, I could talk so much about those Lykos trials, because they also did not talk about, I don't know if I said about this, but they didn't want to talk about, let me see, I think I had, they did not want to talk about the possibility of addiction. So Lykos did not talk about the positive feelings such as euphoria that could have been used to inform the drug's addiction to potential. They left that out of the reports and out of the trials. And so the FDA felt like they left out information that they didn't want known, and accused Lykos of a lack of professionalism and rigor. So there's a couple other things that went down that probably should have been more stringently looked after.
There are a couple here that couple questions that kind of go
Yeah.
together, I would say, between Elena and Kim. Elena wants to know how you get into a research trial. And then Kim said, are there scientists in other countries having the same issues, and are they doing trials?
Well, there's a lot of trials, but like Amsterdam, these psychedelics are legal, and then they're legal in Jamaica and Mexico also. And so there's military support groups that aren't associated with the military, that are sending military vets to Mexico to get these psychedelic treatments. And in 1 week, I was able to go participate in one, just so that I could figure out how I could help underserved women get this kind of help. But in 1 week, there's amazing transformations that happen after 2 treatments with a variety of these drugs. And so, right now you have to go to another country to legally get this medication. But again, because there are so many people reading about the potential of this for mental health conditions, and coming to me, coming to the doctors and saying, where can I get this? Where can I get this? The underground is flourishing and booming. And there
Well-
are a lot of really qualified guides that are helping people get the help they need, whether it's to send them to Mexico or Jamaica or send them to qualified people here.
Are there any current trials at UW, and how would you get into
Yes.
those?
I will, so there, I have that written down, so I'm going to end up saying it again. So, because if I follow my notes, I'll have to. But there's like 116 psychedelic trials still going on right now. And you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and find out when, which ones are actually looking for participants. But I will, for anybody who's interested, I can find out, because the UW has, I think, 5 or 6 clinical trials that they're actively looking for participants for right now. And some of them have specific issues, like there's an opiate use disorder trial going on right now at the UW that they are trying to use different psychedelics to treat. And so I can refer you to, it's actually the UW Transdisciplinary Center for Psychoactive Research, and they are controlling a lot of the trials. So I can for sure put that somewhere, or anybody can come to me and I'll figure out how to contact there, because one of my professors is the director.
I would say when we get at the end, like have your slide up with your email. So if somebody in this group wants
Yes.
to email you directly, then you can take it up specifically.
Absolutely.
Michael said, are there or will there be lobby efforts state or nationally moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, that's one of the reasons Lycos is one of MAP's founders left the board, is because he said, I can do a better job lobbying for the FDA to approve this when I'm not associated with the company than I can if I'm stuck in the company. So there's a lot of people pushing still really hard. And there's going to, I think that there's going to be a, I don't know what you call it, but they're going to try to go back and see if the FDA will re-review the results and change their mind. So there's a lot of things. But again, it took Lycos 17 years to do these trials. And so, you know, we don't know where things are going to go from here because they don't want to have to do another trial. It's going to cost another tens of millions of dollars. And like I said, they've already cut 30% of their staff because everybody was really gearing up in March. Everybody was really gearing up for manufacturing and commercialization. So it's crazy, but I really think that, you know, people already know that MDMA is good for trauma, and psilocybin is good for depression. And it's an easy prediction that the science is going to continue to confirm this. So again, if anybody's interested, clinical trials, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, or I can put you in touch with the people at the UW. The UW Transdisciplinary Center for Psychoactive Research is doing trials. USONA, a company in Fitchburg, is the first center in the world devoted to psychedelic studies and treatments once they become legal. So we're really, I mean, Wisconsin is amazingly progressive in this area. It's always shocking. And my program, you know, the fact that I'm in psychoactive pharmaceutical investigations at the School of Pharmacy is also really, really progressive. So, and I really see, just to wrap this up, I really see that there are going to be 3 different paths coming down for psychedelics. I do believe that eventually we're going to have a medicalization where the FDA goes through. People who are going to want to go through their doctor and go sit in a medical facility and get a treatment will eventually be able to do that. But I also think that we're going to continue pushing towards the community-based programs like the ones started in Oregon that are legal, but not through insurance and not through a medical facility, because I hope that those places can reach people who really need the help, that might not have insurance, might not be in a position where, they can get that kind of help they need. But also there's a lot of people who believe that giving people a pill in a medical setting really removes a lot of the wisdom and traditions that these indigenous communities have used for thousands of years, and that we're trying to medicalize and sterilize these treatments where there's a lot to be said for the rituals and for the way that people have done it. They know what they're doing. And then there's always going to be, we're going to have the pharmaceutical companies first relinquish, the government and the pharmaceutical companies relinquish a lot of their tight control over what they think they own and what they think they should be able to do exclusively. But like I said, I think the underground is also going to be where people are going to have the autonomy to heal themselves in the way they feel is best. And, I'm not promoting that, but it is already, it's already flourishing because so many people are crying for this help. And that's why that's what I really believe we have to be able to do this. I mean, just thinking about the military vets alone is enough. But then you think the next biggest demographic for suicide is teenage boys. The pandemic really highlighted the mental health issues that everybody's struggling with. Now we can bring them out in the open, and it is time to give some people some help.
Definitely. So Bev, we have 3 more questions and we're creeping up towards the end. So
Yeah.
let me give you another one. What role will pharmacists have in this therapy, and can they assist MDs?
Well, absolutely. The pharmacists are going to be critical, but because we don't know how the credentialing is going to go, we have no idea what kind of credentials you're going to need to be able to do this. But, right now, any kind of healthcare professional, including pharmacists, will be able to get credentialed to be facilitators for psychedelics. There's a lot of programs that are offering credentialing now, but we don't know who are going to be the programs that are approved. So it is kind of the wild, wild west right now. Still a lot of unknowns, and that's why it's an exciting time to be in this program. So
Absolutely.
before I can answer some more questions, but I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. But then also I wanted to let you know that Kelly says there's going to be an evaluation or some kind of review of
Yeah,
the
like an
talk?
email is going to come out for you to give feedback.
Okay.
Well, let's hope you get it.
You're right. But I just wanted to let you know that if there's anything, I could talk for hours about each of these subjects. And so if there's anything that you're interested in or want to do a deeper dive on, please let her know that in the email, and then maybe we can do this again. I have loved seeing so many of you. Joanne, thank you. And I look forward to hopefully, I'll see a lot of you in person soon. But thank you so much for being here. It really meant a lot to me.
Okay. Now, can you see the chat?
Now I can probably go on the
Yes.
chat.
So there's a question about ketamine. Can you speak to that briefly, or is that?
Actually, I know that there's ketamine clinics. One of my favorite professors runs a ketamine clinic and is doing ketamine research. So I don't know enough about it, but it is actively the answer for so many things right now, and they're really actively researching it, but also giving people treatments.
I'd say if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question now, that would be fine.
I mean, perfect timing. You guys
Yeah.
knew exactly how to ask the right questions.
Right?
And then please look at those. Both of those email addresses are both current for me. One's my school email address and the other one I check every day. So if you have any questions or you want more information on the clinical trials, I can put you in touch with the right people. And then it is an exhaustive process to actually get in a clinical trial because they want to eliminate as many variables as possible. But I do have a lot of my peers actually in my classes that are going through the process of getting into these trials. They're fascinating, really. And a lot of them have to do with depression and PTSD, and I think are worthwhile. I mean, you're furthering science if you're willing to help out.
Well, terrific. Sounds
Well-
like you've covered all the important topics. Everybody has your email. And so I think we're finished here.
Thank you guys so much. I can't see anybody's faces, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of you. You know who you
Great.
are. I love you all.
Thank you, Bev. It was awesome.
Thank
Good
you. I'll
night.
see you guys shortly. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you, Kelly.